Their faces haunting, the stories of how they died still unknown. At one of those recovery scenes, this.
A black leather belt embossed with the letters HM or WH was recovered.
The police commissioner shows the first item of evidence released to the public in nearly 9 years.
We believe that the belt was handled by the suspect and did not belong to any of the victims.
Investigators say a person involved in at least one of the killings is somehow tied to the belt with the initials emblazoned on it. Exactly how, they won't say. Instead, they're seeking answers from the public through another new resource.
We are launching a website.
It's called gilgonews.com.
With the hope that with its release, the public will generate new tips and new investigative leads.
But the website has yet to work, and there's been criticism of investigators' developments.
For years, 9 years, the Suffolk County Police Department has covered up the facts in this investigation.
John Ray is the attorney for the family of Shannon Gilbert. She was a sex worker whose disappearance after leaving the home of a client in the Gilgo area in 2010 sparked the search that resulted in so many bodies being found. Gilbert had called 911 at length the night she vanished. Release of the tapes of that call was among many things blocked by then Police Chief James Burke and then District Attorney Tom Spoda. Both men have now been convicted of crimes unrelated to the Gilgo killings. New leaders say today's disclosures show more openness, but they're still not releasing Shannon Gilbert's 911 tape.
We don't think she matches many of the patterns of the Gilgo Beach homicides.
And that statement took many by surprise, a statement saying that Shannon Gilbert's death may not be related to the homicidal deaths of the other victims. By the way, Shannon Gilbert's family's attorney strongly disagreeing with that.
All right, folks, if you have any information, and we've posted this online as well, 1-800-220-TIPS, Crime Stoppers. 1-800-220-TIPS at Crime Stoppers. Take a look at that belt buckle, WHHM. Do you recognize it? Does it look at all familiar? Could be a key piece of evidence in all of this. Joining us tonight from New York is the attorney for Shannon Gilbert's family. John Ray is with us. John, thanks so much for joining us. I want to tell you my thoughts about what's happening in this case right now. Nothing. I get the feeling that nothing is being done here. Am I off base here?
Well, you are in certain respect, but I don't know by much. The things that ought to have been done have not been done. The work of the FBI has been peripheral. They haven't kept the FBI in the case very much, the Suffolk County Police, that is. And the homicide squad of the Suffolk County Police Department has done a very thin, they've made a very, very poor effort. They haven't interviewed key witnesses. They just didn't look into this thing as deeply as they ought. And there are perhaps some pretty poor reasons for that. Now, there's a new regime in Suffolk County in the police department, and that new regime we were hoping would sort of break new ice and move forward with this. But right now, the only one doing the investigation outside of the police department is me and a group of people with me. But the police department itself, yeah, they have a whole homicide squad and a room dedicated to the Gilgo Beach murders, but the work that's being done is pretty thin.
Yeah, and I didn't mean nothing was being done by you. What I meant was it just seemed like I went on this gilgonews.com, and I don't know if I don't get good reception here in the studio, but I went on that website, and it tells me you can't connect to it. So I don't know. Do you know if that's working yet?
It is, but
oh, good.
It's supposed to be. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's not working the way it ought, because that's the way everything else is going in this case.
Yeah. So, John, we posted this and we want people to share it, because the more eyes it gets in front of, maybe someone will say something or recognize something with maybe that belt buckle. But some comments people posted I wanted you to respond to. Joanne said she thinks someone in law enforcement might be involved with this, that knows what they're doing and how to get away with it. There's more to come out on this case. Your thoughts about that? Is that out of left field, or do you think that's a possibility that somehow someone either loosely related to law enforcement, former law enforcement, could be responsible for all of this?
Well, there's no doubt that the former police regime in Suffolk County was controlled by a man who was addicted to sex workers, and he headed up the investigation. His name was Chief James Burke. He was the chief of police. He himself got busted in rank. While these murders were occurring, he got busted in rank in the police department because he had solicited a sex worker, was actually dating her, and gave her his car with his gun in it. And he should have been fired, but instead he was only given a 15-day suspension of his personal leave time. And somebody was protecting him all the way up the ranks from when he first got on the police department until he became the chief and became in charge of this investigation. And that person was the district attorney of Suffolk County, Thomas Spoda, who promoted this man, this pervert, all the way up through the ranks to become the chief of police. And when he was the chief of police, or I should rather say, on his way up to becoming that, he had he had more than one sex worker he was living with. I represent one of them myself, and represented her, and the other one I know of, and one of them was actually running a prostitution ring out of this man's home while he was a chief, while he was a captain, and then an inspector, and then eventually the chief of police. And this is the guy that was in charge of investigating the death of 10 sex workers plus a little baby. So, you don't bring the fox into the hen house. And that's exactly what happened here. And so there were some very odd, very bizarre conclusions drawn about this case by the police, and some very bizarre behavior that the police engaged in during the investigation under this man's tutelage, and that this fellow chief of police Burke. There's another fellow who used to be the surgeon of Suffolk County Police Department. He had a title. He wore, he was a brass hat, and he wore a white shirt, and he was the chief surgeon, and also in charge of emergency medical services in Suffolk County. And his name was Dr. Peter Hackett. And Dr. Peter Hackett lived in Oak Beach, and he's the fellow who we think is the chief suspect in the murder of Shannon Gilbert, one of the sex workers, the one that was being looked for when all the others were found. Dr. Hackett was very much connected to the police department and to Chief Burke. So there's a lot of troubled history to the police department's involvement in this case. Hopefully they've cleaned their act up on that. I'm not in their good graces, I suppose, in saying these things. So I don't know. They don't give me an insight to what they're doing. But consider what I've just told you.
And I just have to say, we haven't independently investigated any of this, and I know you have, but we have not here at Court TV. Just want to make that clear for the viewers. But at the end, we're almost out of time here, and I just wanted to address one more thing with you, John, which is that belt buckle. Initials, WH, potentially HM. Your thoughts about that piece of evidence and how significant it could be or maybe isn't. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it is significant. It's a shame that the police won't release the entire piece of evidence, the entire belt itself, and explain where they found it. We hear that it was found. It's on the street, so to speak, that it was found with Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and in connection with her death. She's one of the sex workers found along Ocean Parkway. Don't know that for sure, but you'll also note that there's a light blue tint to the initials. The initials, oddly, coincidentally perhaps, and maybe not so, they match up with the initials of one of the sex workers that Chief Burke was living with, but they also match up with the name of Dr. Hackett and certain other things that might connect it. I don't know. It's maybe coincidental, but if the police are willing to release that, they ought to release some of the other things. For example, the 911 tapes of Shannon Gilbert on the night she disappeared. She called 911 for 23 minutes and said, "They're trying to kill me." And the police department has released a story about what's on those tapes, and the story they released is willfully, deliberately false. And I have the tapes to prove it. So there's something seriously wrong here.
John, we're out of time tonight, but we are going to do the story again and again and again. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, folks, we got a lot more to get to tonight. Crime Time is coming up next.